welcome everyone. My name is Gina Gleason with Real Impact, and we have a very special town hall for you tonight because we have someone that I have been following for so long because he's been doing such great work in the area of transgenderism and gender identity. I've been wanting to talk to him for a while, and I'm so blessed that tonight we have Brandon Showalter, an investigative reporter from the Christian Post. So Brandon, thank you so much for being with me tonight. I'm just so excited because you know that I follow you because I always comment on your post or whatever you're saying. And so it's been good to have that kind of online relationship or friendship, I guess you could say, because I think the work that you're doing is just so important. And so I want to tell everybody that is joining us tonight to please keep children out of the room or out of listening distance. This is not going to be a child-friendly podcast because we are going to talk about some things that are just very serious that most children are not supposed to be hearing at this age, even though they're hearing it in the schools and on social media nowadays. So please, keep that in mind. But what I want to do is, Brandon, you have been doing some phenomenal work. And you created a podcast that I listened to the entirety of the whole thing. It was just phenomenal. And I want you to talk about that today too, but I really want everyone to know that you are an investigative reporter with the Christian Post, but there's more to you than that. So please tell us a little bit about your work and who you are.
Well, it's a pleasure to join you, Gina. And we have an online relationship, but I have met you in person a couple of times too. And I'm so glad to be here joining you tonight. And yes, my name is Brandon Showalter, and I have been a journalist here at the Christian Post since the summer of 2016. But when I'm not at my news desk or editing anything, I'm hiking in the mountains, I'm playing on my piano, singing, cooking great stuff. One of my favorite things to do is hike the 14ers in Colorado. I'm from Virginia, from the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia, raised on 180 acres of countryside. So I'm a son of the Shenandoah Valley, but now I'm here in Washington, D.C. doing the journalism thing, and no one is more surprised about that than I am. Just finished a master's degree at the Catholic University of America. I'm not a Catholic, but that's where I went to graduate school. I graduated in May of 2022. And so I'm just on the gender beat. I fell down this rabbit hole soon after I got started in journalism, and I'm actually joining you here today from the Heritage Foundation, where I'm at some meetings and just listened to detransitioner Chloe Cole, who was transitioned at a very young age, and she was hurried down this pathway. There was a public event, cut her breasts off at 15, and so it's been a dizzying kind of day and just very upsetting to hear about how that happened. But it was 6 years ago here at Heritage where I really put two and two together, and all that I had been reading and researching up until that point, the weight of what has been going on really sank in. And as I like to say, something inside me snapped when I learned what blockers were and how they were putting kids on hormones and then fast tracking them to surgeries and all that. So it's been 6 years, but I don't regret a minute of it, of all the blood, sweat, and tears, all the horrible things that I've seen, because I firmly believe that the truth must be told. And so it's been a journey of telling the truth for the last 6 years on one of the touchiest issues in the world.
Yeah, and most media will not cover this issue.
Oh,
or they'll not cover it.
Or they will deceive about it, or they'll lie about it.
Absolutely. And so the truth isn't out there, so that's why I so admire the work that you've been doing. So you're one of many people who are out there a handful of people who are trying to get the truth out about what is actually happening to our young people, to our children even nowadays. And so that's kind of what I want to cover. But I also want to say to parents, this is so important that even though your child has no clue to what's going on with the transgender or gender identity delusion, parents need to know, because parents are being caught off guard, wouldn't you say?
Oh, for sure. Blindsided, completely bewildered. That was actually one of the reasons you mentioned the podcast series that you listened to. That was probably one of our main goals. Well, sort of the impetus for this podcast series that we did here at the Christian Post, launched last fall in October. It was a 5-episode documentary-style investigative podcast series called Generation Indoctrination Inside the Transgender Battle. We did a bonus episode on the issue of women in prisons who are locked up with men. So that's the bonus episode that was released in December. We wanted to speak to parents who are indeed being caught off guard, where perhaps at school their children are going to guidance counselors or being told by teachers that they can pick their sex. Gender identity, as is the euphemism. It's just so much of the indoctrination is going on behind parents' backs. They don't support it. They aren't allowed in. Schools actively hide this kind of thing. And parents are left scrambling when their child somehow suddenly, whether out of genuine distress or via a social contagion, declare themselves to be the opposite sex, to adopt a transgender identity. And all the institutions work to undermine or marginalize these parents who are just concerned and want the best for their kids, but they're definitely, as you say, caught off guard and bewildered by it all.
And one of the reasons the schools are in this position is because there are laws that are passed that require the school districts to comply with some of these LGBT laws that require teachers to be trained and how to be sensitive, how to provide therapies and resources and outside resources outside of the school even. Right. And so the teachers become well trained in this. They feel that they must comply. And so the teachers are also caught in the spot. So I think that parents really need to be talking to the school teacher from kindergarten all the way to high school.
All the way up. You're right. There are laws everywhere, but even in places where you wouldn't expect this kind of radicalism to be, deep red states, I mean, you're in California, the blue bastion, but these policies are, even if state laws and regulations aren't on the books, a lot of this is happening just because the school activist teachers do it on their own accord. And so even if there isn't any explicit law, though in many states like yours, there absolutely are laws that enforce this and require this statutorily, and the ideological indoctrination of children into this madness is quite prevalent. You'd be surprised that the way the activists are operating, they're doing so even in places where it violates the law, but they're doing it in a very sneaky and stealthy way of their own volition.
Yeah, so not only is it the teachers that are the activists sometimes, but the whole thing that we're learning now about the public school libraries.
Oh, yeah.
And the pornography that is in the school library is just unimaginable that somebody would even think it's okay to do something like this. And there are people who are actively trying to work and get the books out of the libraries where you think that your child should be safe.
Yeah.
And what we're finding...
it's such a perverse place to corrupt children because, and I sometimes wonder what is the wokest sort of association of professionals. I think the American Library Association is probably right up there in the top 3 or 4. I mean, it's just the radical, horrible, and yes, pornographic content that's being, pumped into places where children are supposed to cultivate a love of reading and learning is now this place where there are books where I think of a couple of them that are famous, where you see pictures of children performing sex acts on adults. And it's just, who on earth thought that this was a good idea to put this in front of children and exploit their brains that are still forming and introduce them and break down their boundaries? Again, and of course we know about Drag Queen Story Hour, which takes place in libraries as well, and that's all part of this whole process of indoctrination. But there's no sacred space anymore. There's no place where you would expect it to have some sort of innocent vibe to it. Nope. Everything has just been corroded by this truly perverse ideology that just ruptures the innocence of children. We should care about that as a society. I'm astonished at some of the things that I see, and God bless all the parents who are raising the alarm and trying to get this trash out of out from under the side. It's a very human, normal thing to care about, and we shouldn't even have to, but we must in this hour.
Well, and not only is it the parents who care about this and are raising the alarm, but the parents that are into this. I did go to one of the library story hours in Santa Ana, California, a mostly Hispanic community, and I watched as parents walked in with their very young children, and the drag queen proceeded to tell the story. And I was astonished. I looked at the parents that were walking in, and I just couldn't understand where they're coming from, why they think this is okay, because the drag queens, they're monstrous looking, perverse,
Yeah.
and exposing their child to something like this at these very young ages is just so shocking. And a lot of the times, not only are the parents caught off guard, but they are participating in it. Like the young boy from Texas, I forgot his name, James. Is his name
James Younger. Yeah.
James Younger. Can you tell that story about James? Because that's Chloe's story, Abigail Martinez's daughter Yaley's story,
There's
but
so many
James
stories.
Younger. Yes, tell the story of James Younger.
Ooh. Well, the Younger case is probably one of the most painful cases. A few years ago now, it actually made international headlines, but the basics of it, and I would encourage everyone to go read, sort of look this up and sort of get the full version, because the details are quite horrifying. It was a couple down in Texas. The mother began transing the boy. It's twin boys, but he trying to turn one of them into a girl, which is physically impossible. Started cross-dressing him and calling him by a girl name over the objections of the father. There was a messy divorce, and then a court battle that's now been, I think the twins are 9 or 10 now. So this process started when I think the children were 3. And so it's been this protracted legal fight, and the family courts, all sorts of horrifying twists and turns. But a few years ago, everything sort of blew up. I think it was the fall of 2019, where the custody arrangement was such that it was 50-50 joint, and the judge upheld the joint custody. But then it was transferred to another district in Texas, where basically the judge was a radical, activist for the transgender lobby, and completely hamstrung the father, who was trying to prevent the chemical castration of his son James. But since that time, California has passed a law that has created what has been called and is a trans sanctuary state, where, because Texas has some kind of, it's hard, this kind of medical experimentation is going on nationwide, but the Dallas clinic where the little boy was being seen has since closed, and they're still operating there, but there's been some pushback in Texas, and so it is more of a complicated ordeal to try and do this there than it is in the wild, wild west of California. But with this new law that California passed very recently, I think it was signed into law in September, late September, I believe.
Yeah, this past year.
Senate SB 107, I think.
107, yes.
107.
Mm-hmm.
That has created a safe haven for parents from out of state to bring their children to undergo this chemical and surgical transing, and they can't enforce various sort of court orders from other states. They have sort of formed this protection racket around those who wish to do this to their children, or to minors who get away. I remember reading the law, and it was just so horrifying, and I don't think I even saw the very final version that was eventually signed, but it really undermines people from out of state. If you think you're just going to escape California crazy laws because you live in a red state, nope. Now they've made it such that if you can get to California, you can still do grave harm, and other states are hamstrung from really trying to intervene. And this will probably be seen court battles about this. But the mother has taken these twin boys, and so she's somewhere in, I think, Los Angeles County, and I don't know where they are, but the Texas Supreme Court recently denied the father's claim, and it was such a, I think he filed, it was a mandamus that was turned down, and so it's still a fight ongoing. I know the father, and I know he will continue to fight for his son, but it is an absolute nightmare what has gone on. He never could have conceived this. No one could have. The things that I've seen is just hard to even believe that some of this is real. And if I wasn't at the news desk doing journalistic work on this, I'm not even sure I would believe it, Gina. But this is it's some of the worst, most abominable filth and evil and abuse of children, and it's one of the worst medical scandals that the world has ever seen.
Are the parents required to have any type of psychological evaluation? The mother, is she required to have any kind of therapy or?
I don't know what the laws are on that.
I've never heard that.
Yeah, with parents, I don't know about that. There are some interesting studies out there about what they call Munchausen's by proxy syndrome, but the psychiatric literature doesn't use that phrase anymore. They're called factitious disorders. I saw a review from I think 2017. It was a review of a lot of the studies on this from the Journal of Child Abuse and Neglect, and it was measuring. I think they surveyed 750 or so cases of medical abuse of children, and 97.6% of the cases were as the mother abusing the child, not the father. With medical abuse of children, it's the moms, the munchy moms, as it goes. I don't know much about sort of what counseling is required for the parents, but increasingly what we are seeing in certain states, Planned Parenthood is in on this gender medicine, and you can get testosterone via a telehealth call in 30 minutes with no psychological evaluation. There's no physical exam, easy peasy. It's astonishing. This is a controlled substance, and they're passing it out like candy. I can hardly even believe that this is real. I mean, I've had parents call me saying that they called Planned Parenthood and they were given testosterone. They just self-declared as the opposite sex, went in there. They took a blood sample, their blood pressure, and filled out an informed consent document with a few, but not all of the risks, and they had their drugs. It's astonishing.
Well, a generation of young people are having their human rights stripped of them, right? Yeah. Their bodily rights to function as a normal human being, because some of these children will grow up like Chloe and like others, and never be able to reproduce or nurse their child, or father a child. And so I don't think that parents really understand that there is help, but not the kind of help that is very commonly available to parents. Yeah. What would you say to a parent who has a child that comes to him or her, the parent, and he or she says that he or she is now the opposite gender? I think the worst thing you can do is just take them to the local psychologist. That's
unless you know the psychologist personally and you know them to be a sane thinking person who doesn't embrace this dogma, you're absolutely right. Psychologists are some of the absolute worst, and this ideology has captured so many professions. It's absolutely staggering to see. I hesitate to give universal advice to parents. I'm not a parent myself, but because I am a committed Christian and a strong believer in the Lord Jesus Christ and the authority of the believer in the Holy Spirit, in the name of Jesus, you just need to stand and not budge and ask God for wisdom and trust that He will give it to you. Absolutely. But you have to parent this issue, and you have to confront this and refuse to budge and tell your children the truth. How to go about it with every case, I hesitate to give any sort of practical advice because you have to use wisdom and make tough calls. But you need to tell them there's nothing wrong with their bodies, that they're fearfully and wonderfully made, that we're made male and female in God's image according to Genesis 1:27, and especially if they're Christian. Now, if you're not a Christian, just talk to them about biology. You're a sexually dimorphic mammal. It's impossible to become the other sex, and it's an immutable fact. And there's many ways to express your masculinity or your femininity. Some girls are tomboys. Some boys prefer the creative arts instead of sports. That's fine. Mm-hmm. And so, some of these other gender norms that are quite rigid in certain parts of the country, though, I think it's weird to talk about that because I think we live in a society increasingly where you can do whatever you like, but for some, that's an issue. So give permission to sort of explore other interests, but emphasize that the lie of becoming trans or whatever is that your body is somehow, as a whole, wrong. And let me just say, Gina, no one has ever been or ever will be born in the wrong body.
Abs-
So parents, decimate that lie with as much enthusiasm as you possibly can.
Absolutely. And in some states like California, you actually cannot take your child to have counseling to have them affirm their natural born gender. It's
Yeah.
against the law in California and a few other states.
Yeah, about 20, I think, 20 or so,
Mhm.
where they call conversion therapy, which is such a misnomer. And if you want to get them help to sort of accept their bodies as they are, it is illegal. There are some ways around that, I think, but parents and pastors have some free,
Yes, they
they're
do.
not restricted by the same laws that counselors and therapists and other licensed professionals are. But you parents have got to drill down and really tell your children the truth. I want to, and I know I'm coming down hard against these lies, and I will continue to do so, but it is also very important to express compassion for those who really are suffering. There are those people,
Absolutely.
and I don't want it to come across that I sort of somehow think that people aren't. If you really are suffering, it really is a nightmare, because oftentimes gender dysphoria, as they call it, the confusion over one's biological sex and incongruence there, it's comorbid with other mental health uh, ailments and conditions, and it's truly horrible. It's a
I can
nightmare to
imagine.
suffer
Mhm.
with the confusion about your body, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone. And we need to absolutely show a lot of compassion and concern for those people. They do exist, and certainly nothing to make fun of. I mean, we need to help people along and explore the other issues that may be ailing them, and guide them along in their process, and love them all the way.
Yeah, and I hope that more and more churches are recognizing that they need to step up and help the families that are struggling.
I really do.
Because, yeah, there are some churches that just absolutely won't.
Hmm.
But I suggest that if you are a Christian, that you do find a church that would be willing to talk, to pray,
Hmm.
to guide with biblical truth, and hopefully there will be a solution there.
Amen.
Because it's an epidemic. Would you call it an epidemic?
I absolutely would. It's affecting more people than you know. It's more widespread than you know. This is happening to Christian families. It's happening to secular families, left wing, right wing, Republican, Democrat, all faiths. My philosophy is I'll talk to anyone. I don't want to see anyone harmed by this. I don't care what your views are. I'm happy to report stories, and I've talked to a wide variety of people. If you think that this issue won't affect you, that is exactly what parents tell me, and when they come to me desperate at the end of themselves, they never could have, this view that, oh, it's just a teeny tiny number of little people. Nope, this is so much more widespread that the figures are just exploding. I do believe, as I said a moment ago, I said social contagion. This is spread via social media, websites like Tumblr and YouTube, and across a lot of different, of course, it's in the schools as well. But in the same way that anorexia and other self-harming behaviors have spread by social contagion, the same thing is happening with this. And so it absolutely is an epidemic, and it's coming for your children. So you've got to pray over them every day. Uh, I wouldn't give them a phone. I mean, keep them off tech as much as possible, because that is, I think, really
That's a
one of
gateway.
the main sources of it. But you just can't be too careful here. And I hate that we live in a culture that enables and allows so much of this. But here we are, and so do your best.
Yeah, absolutely. I did interview Abigail Martinez about what happened with her daughter Yaley. And one of the things Abigail mentioned, that she was just completely caught off guard, completely surprised
Yeah.
at what was happening with Yaley. Can you tell Abigail's story, please?
I will tell it as best I can. It is a truly tragic case, like the younger case. Abigail's daughter, Yaley, and she's based in Southern California, started dealing with some depression. No, she wasn't a tomboy. She was a girly girl as a kid, but started dealing with some mental health challenges. I think she got bullied in school, some social difficulties, anxiety, I believe. I think got mired in the LGBT friend groups and clubs at school, and started
At
to
school. Yep.
believe that she was born in the wrong body. So she's struggling mentally, and became convinced that she was the opposite sex and needed to transition, change her name to Andrew. And then because Abigail was not supportive of it, and the state social services agency, I'm sure in collaboration with the school, intervened and removed Yaley from Abigail's custody so that Yaley could go to a group home and then begin legally under California law. And it was actually even a federal, I don't know all the legal minutia, but there was federal policy that enabled this as well for California, so that Yaley could start taking cross-sex hormones, I believe. And I'm pretty sure it was Children's Hospital LA. I'm not entirely sure about that,
I
but
believe it was.
at a transgender clinic, and it's a pretty large one down there at LA. And the hormones caused her tremendous pain, didn't help her mental health struggles. Abigail went to court, pleaded with them to do a psychological evaluation. They only let her see her daughter for a very short amount of time. The social workers and the powers that be didn't allow her to talk about God. I mean, it was an absolute nightmarish vampire state behemoth that just devoured that family. And sadly, Yaley's story ends in tragedy, where because none of this helps her mental health, she was suffering even more. Yaley wound up taking her own life by suicide, and she knelt in front of a train. And poor Abigail had to get every parent's worst nightmare phone call that her daughter had taken her life. And I heard Abigail give her story in March of last year here at the Heritage Foundation, where she describes sort of hearing about how they had to pick the pieces of Yaley's body out of the train tracks. I mean, just everybody was in tears. I was such a gut punch. I remember tweeting about it. I had a thread that went semi-viral. Abigail's story is told in Tucker Carlson's documentary, Transgressive, The Cult of Confusion on Fox Nation. I'm in that documentary as well. It's one of the most horrific and saddest stories that I've ever heard. What happened to her, it's just the unbelievable loss and searing pain. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. It's absolutely horrific.
Yeah, another parent caught off guard, and it was the school that played a role in the very beginning.
Yes.
Of helping Yaley identify as a boy, and then social services were brought in. But Abigail trusted the school system and the psychologist to help her with her daughter. And they were actually working against her.
Completely.
And that's
the same old story. I hear that time and time again. Parents are completely undermined and manipulated and marginalized. It's awful. By the people who hold themselves out as professionals.
Absolutely. I just listened to the Chloe Cole interview that Jordan Peterson did, and it was a more in-depth interview. And the same thing with Chloe. Now that she's a grown woman and has transitioned back to her natural-born gender, Chloe is leading a fight to raise awareness about what's going on with the young people and how they're being fooled,
right.
They're being lied to, and she is actually suing. Is it Kaiser? I believe she's suing Kaiser.
Yes.
And she has an attorney, and she's doing what she can to get the word out about this. And she is, 19? I
think she's 18.
And so brave.
Just heard her speak an hour ago, literally.
Yeah, she has been so brave. And I am just amazed that someone that young is probably really going to make a difference, I think, to help stop some of this, like you will make a difference.
I hope so as well. But let me say to you, Gina, I don't think anyone should have to. It's so unfortunate that this has to be her life now. But she is stepping up to the challenge, and I asked her. I actually asked her during Q&A. What are you hearing now from other detransitioners and others? And she said a bunch of things, but like they're getting younger and younger. And so what I think is unique about Chloe is that she has become the face of those in America who were transed as minors. There are a lot of people who are detransitioned, but they took hormones and got their breasts cut off when they were 18 or above. And so they may feel bad for them, but they were legal adults when they did it. I still think it's unethical, but there are those who have come forward that did a lot of this in their very late teens or early adult, early 20s, that kind of thing. Chloe was put on blockers and then hormones, I think at 12 or 13, and then
Yeah.
had her breast cut off at 15 and regretted it at 16. So she was on the younger end of things. And so to hear from someone like that is truly astonishing, and it's an important perspective to consider. But I think we're going to be sadly hearing from more and more of people like her come forward in the next few years. And as I've often said, I'm going to be among the few that is not shocked by the scope of how many. I mean, we're going to see a wave of people who were damaged and harmed irreversibly by all of this, and it's going to be a national stain in history that politicians ever supported this. I don't think any politician, regardless of their political affiliation, whether they're a Democrat and they were pushing this or they were a Republican and they didn't do anything to fight it, they shouldn't be allowed to live this down, because it's an atrocity what's happening. I mean, we're feeding children into a nightmarish medical experiment.
And it's just so amazing how the media has promoted and endorsed and just pushed this idea that
Terrible.
transitioning or being confused about your gender is such a wonderful thing. And that if you're not
Yes.
accepting, that you're the one that's the bigot.
Right.
And so now it seems to be that the conservative Christian community seems to be the target. And they want to silence us, right?
Yeah.
Is that what you're
We're
saying?
kind of used to that.
Yeah, it's been going on, and it's intensifying.
Yeah.
And we really don't have the platforms that the other side does. Now we have Twitter, right, with what Elon's done with Twitter.
Yeah.
But for the most part, we are being silenced. And I mean, it started many years ago here in California, where not only did they tried to silence us, but the people who are on the side of promoting this, like some of the legislators in California who have written some truly horrible bills for people that follow legislation, every year it seems to get worse.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought last year was horrible.
Yeah.
I'm waiting for the legislation that's coming out this year, and I can only imagine, because what they're doing is they're fine-tuning all the laws that they've passed regarding some of these sexual identity things and giving kids more freedom and taking away parental rights.
Yeah.
That is just so frightening to me. That's one of the biggest things I fear.
Yes.
Is just out and out losing all of our rights, and we're seeing that.
We are. I've said before, it's kind of a pithy little phrase, but I've often said that there's a three-part, trifold goal of trans activism, and that's the 3 C's. You capture the mind, chemically castrate and cut the body, and crush the family. And not necessarily in that order, but that seems to happen. And the scary part about this is the goal of activists to split the parent-child bond, the rupture the family ties, and the absolute decimation of parental rights. It is just astonishing, the gall that activists in a variety of professions say that, no, we know your child better than you do. We know what's best for your child. Your child has rights independent of the parents. And I'm not talking about truly abusive parents where it actually, in the most extreme cases, would warrant some kind of legitimate state intervention to protect a child from abuse. This is if a parent disagrees that their girl is a boy or vice versa, states are taking it upon themselves to say, actually, no, you're an unfit abusive parent. We know best. And they'll facilitate some truly grotesque medical practices. I don't even like to call it medicine. I call it medicalization. It's all experimental. Drugs are used off-label. Your body parts, you can't get them back after you cut them off. I mean, and parents are just left in a lurch and not knowing what to do. The medical aspect of this is bad enough, but I think there's going to be some books that come on the scene, maybe I'll even have to write one, about the relational rupture and dysfunction that has happened after gender ideology invades a home.
Yeah, so Brandon, when all this happens, there's some steps that the child typically goes through. You want to explain some of those, like social transition, then the puberty blockers, and then the others. Can you talk a little bit about that, so people can recognize that?
I sort of said this in the Tucker Carlson documentary on Fox Nation that I participated in, but it's all part of a prescribed pathway. Functionally, sort of our schools are kind of more of ground zero of this medical scandal than even the clinics and the hospitals themselves, because the schools are where a lot of the indoctrination, and on social media and tech, a lot of that happens and is celebrated at school. Children become convinced that they are something other than their biological sex, and in order to become their true selves, as the lingo goes, they must then embark upon a pathway of drugs and surgeries to then become this new person. All of it's a lie, and all of it's, again, a medical experiment. But if this happens to a child who is prepubescent and the parents are intimidated into going along with this, or depending on the state, even minors can access some of these drugs. I've never heard of someone getting puberty blockers as a minor, because usually that's before puberty, so you got to be very young. But a child will be put on a blocker, which then halts natural, normal puberty to stop the normal development of one's secondary sex characteristics. That, one of the most famous one is Lupron, which they use for like precocious puberty, which is an abnormal sort of the onset of puberty happens too early. They'll delay that until it's a proper age, and that's actually. These drugs are pretty harsh, but that's a legitimate medical use of that drug. But in this context, it's being used to halt normal puberty, which puberty is not a disease. And so it can affect your brain development, your bones, all sorts of other, your hormone levels. Your endocrine system really governs a lot in your body, and so it can really do some pretty profound changes. Almost all children who are put on the blockers continue on with synthetic cross-sex hormones. And so girls will receive testosterone, boys will receive estrogen, spironolactone. It kind of depends on every case, just how they give the drug regimen, different dosages and whatnot. And sometimes followed after that is a surgery to make the genitalia appear more like the opposite sex, or removal of the breasts, or the addition of synthetic breasts for boys and men. Breast surgeries, sometimes they're done even if you're not on hormones. They can just cut the breasts off. That's very typical now for teen girls. Teen girls are the primary demographic here, the predominant demographic. What was known as gender dysphoria is a vanishingly rare condition seen almost exclusively in young boys. Now it's just via social contagion. Again, it's skyrocketing among teen girls. The watershed book that was written in 2020 was Irreversible Damage, The Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters by Abigail Schreier. That's sort of where a lot of this is happening. The older men who undergo these sex, transformations, that was kind of what people associated with, people down in Mardi Gras, cross-dressing, the kind of paraphilia type stuff. What's besieging our young people now is, there are teen boys mired in this as well, but we're seeing, I think, in England, I believe it was across almost a decade, a 4,000 plus fold, 4,000% increase, enormous spike in the span of about 10 years, mostly girls again. So it's brutal. It's a brutal assault on families and on young people who are genuinely confused, but some of this, again, is spread by social contagion. But the pharmaceutical industry, the medical industrial complex, and an entire cottage industry of people who are ready to make money surrounds a child with all of these products to sell them. They're being marketed this by a lot of people who stand to profit handsomely from their exploitation. And I don't feel bad saying it that way, because that's what I believe that it is. It's pretty dizzying. And I'll tell you this too. Blockers are quite expensive. You get even just a small group to go on blockers. They're costing thousands of dollars, especially if you have like a subcutaneous implant in your arm, which is often how they do it. We're talking about many thousands of dollars, and you spread that out over a course of several years. The pharmaceutical companies are making millions of dollars. And so if you've got an enormous spike and you've got increasing amounts of children being drugged, they're laughing all the way to the bank, and that's not overstating it.
Yeah, absolutely. And Yeah, they have a phase that they go through. One thing I want to focus on is the social transition. That's when the child is not at the point where they're removing their breast, but they
Right.
start changing the way they appear. The girl cuts her hair, the boy grows his hair. They start changing the clothes that they wear. Girls start wearing chest binders,
Yep.
and they start taking on the appearance. And that should be a clue that if your child is wanting to do those things, you better start looking into it, because parents just don't really realize it's happening.
And it's not a medical intervention in the sense that you're adding a hormone or a surgery, but it's psychologically preparing children for a much more risky and dangerous intervention. Uh, Changing your name, your pronouns. I've even heard schools where they have what are known as transition closets, where a child
Yeah,
will come to school dressed one way.
that is
And
so unbelievable.
I know,
Parents
it's
do
just
not
so
know that.
awful.
That's the real thing.
And they'll change clothes and present as the opposite sex while at school, and then change back into clothes, so the parents are kept completely in the dark. And it's all celebrated, and they have all of these awareness days that are celebrated throughout the month. I mean, they're just pummeled with all of this gender dogma all year long. I mean, you just never rest from it. The schools will, operate behind parents' back and keep it secret. They have gender support plans, as they're called, where social workers and guidance counselors collaborate together to change the identity of a child while they were at school, and even correspond with school staff on one set of documents within the school, and on another set of documents deceive the parents that they're calling them by their original actual given name on another set of documents. And so the deception is just rampant around this. But then it also sort of reinforces it within the social environment of the school, where students and teachers and staff all sort of participate in it. So there's tremendous confusion that then surrounds a child who may indeed be suffering, but parents are kept out. And so, but then there are those cases too where the parents are also part of it too, where they help facilitate it all and call by a different name, pronouns, different kinds of clothes, stereotypes, other things that are, they do different things to try and make it seem like they really are the opposite sex. Activities that are usually more typically practiced by one sex than the other. And the obnoxious thing about it is that I think transgenderism is a reinforcement of some of the old regressive stereotypes that a lot of people have fought against, except it's just sort of flipped around on its head. So what if a boy likes the arts, and that's a great thing. I celebrate that. Mm-hmm. Well, you see these people that say, well, I like this, this activity, so that makes me a girl, or I wear these kinds of clothes, so that makes me a boy, or whatever. Like, no. Maybe you're just not a particularly gender conforming kind of person. Okay, you're still the same sex you have always have been and always will be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure there's plenty of parents and grandparents who are listening right now, and they're saying to themselves, that's not my child or my grandchild.
Yeah, I would check.
Do they know, right?
You cannot be too careful. You got to watch like a hawk. This is getting in the most unlikely people. I'll say another thing too about the social transitioning that makes this that much more complicated is that, again, especially in schools in very liberal areas, the ideological indoctrination that is happening, and I think it actually goes alongside with what they call social and emotional learning, where their boundaries are broken down, and so they're then become so easy to accept over, obvious lies like men can be women, or some women can have a penis, or whatever. Their psychological categories for processing information are so interrupted that they can then swallow lies, and so that's not exactly social transitioning, but the brainwashing that happens into this insanity very much factors into this, to the point where I have gotten phone calls where mothers tell me that their sons who got mired into this, for example, these boys actually believe that they can change their genetic code, their DNA, their sex chromosomes with synthetic hormones. They believe that can somehow change. They can change their genes with testosterone or estrogen. That's how deep the indoctrination goes, where it's just not true. Nothing can change your DNA. It's stamped on the nucleus of every single cell.
Well, I hadn't heard that one.
Yeah. Every day I think, how can this get worse, or what crazy thing will I hear today? They always manage to blow me away with the it's both idiotic and stupid and really evil, and that's just the combination of the absurdity of all this combined with how malevolent and insidious and awful this is. It's pretty staggering.
People just refuse to be grounded in realism. What's
Yeah,
real? What's
yeah,
true? No,
for sure.
there's people in denial. So Brandon,
There's an atheist evolutionary biologist that I actually have met and know now, and he has called this reality's last stand. I
wow,
totally agree with that.
true, very true. So Brandon, how can our viewers get a hold of your podcast?
Well, it's available on all podcast platforms, and we're quite proud of it at the Christian Post. It was very successful. Please keep listening to it and sharing it. Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. It's called Generation Indoctrination. 5 episodes, and it focuses mostly on schools and the medical field and some of the laws and policies that surround this issue as it pertains to children, what's happening to them, ideologically, and the medical harm. We do feature the testimony of a detransitioner in the 5th episode. As I also mentioned, we did a bonus episode because we wanted to highlight the voices of another vulnerable community, women in prison in California. You actually have a state law that enables males who claim to be women to transfer into women's correctional facilities. And so we did a bonus episode. Even though it's not related to children in the School of Medicine, it's still very much germane to this topic. They're giving testosterone to the female inmates now too. So there's a medical scandal going on within the prison clinics. But that's available on the Christian Post website and on all podcast platforms. I do recommend that people check that out. If I may, I'll also just say all of our print journalism on these issues, and we continue to cover it both on our op-ed page and in news, is at christianpost.com. And I was most recently in a documentary film called Dead Name, which by filmmaker Taylor Reese, and it profiles 3 families that have been upended by this ideology. They all have very unique, horrible stories that are very, very moving, but they are all so similar. The dynamics that surround a family when this kind of thing comes on the scene is quite something. It's 50 minutes. I was honored to be a contributor in it. It's available now on Vimeo. It's called Dead Name, 2 words. If you don't know what dead name is, that's like when someone who claims to be trans and adopts a new name, the name that their parents gave them in transgender speak, that's their dead name. But the filmmaker chose that name because it's emblematic of the larger struggle that families face when children suddenly become confused in this way. But we're going to continue to tell the truth at the Christian Post. That I can tell you for sure.
Absolutely, and you're doing a wonderful job about it. Look, and you do it with compassion.
I try. I certainly try.
You tell the truth, but the truth must be told, and you're not doing it in a hateful way that people could ever accuse you of being a hater, because you're not.
I appreciate that. I try to. It's definitely a balancing act, because this stuff gets me very angry, and when I think of the Lord Jesus Christ, he had no tolerance for people who hurt children. I've said before that I don't think there's a millstone heavy enough for those who are carving up their bodies in pursuit of a lie and giving them drugs that render them sterile. I have such distaste for this insane medical scandal, but I appreciate your words about compassion. I think that's, again, in the film Dead Name that I was talking about, and if people want to see it at Vimeo, it's well worth seeing. It's a very compassionate look. It's an intimate portrait glimpse into what it's really like for families. If you don't understand this issue, I would very much recommend that you see this documentary, because it does engage the subject with a lot of compassion. It's sad, and it is angering to see the medical abuse that's going on in there. But if you want to engage this subject with compassion, that's the film you should watch.
Well, absolutely. And so, like I said earlier, this was done for the purposes of warning parents. Don't say, "Not my child." There's just always that possibility that we want parents to be aware, to look out for what their children are into, and know what's going on. So one of the best things that a parent can do, or a grandparent, is to be informed. You can't ignore this any longer. It's affecting family, friends that I know personally, people who
Yes.
have served in the church, friends from church that I really maybe not don't even know well sometimes, but they're coming to the church
Yes.
because they are struggling with this. So just because you're a Christian and raising your child in the church does not mean that your family is exempt from
Affecting
this.
so many.
Yeah,
And if,
absolutely.
on that note, Gina, if there's anyone who's watching or listening to this, and that is, she's describing what you're going through, feel free to reach out to me. And as Gina was also saying about educating yourself, I've got a document of resources that I put together. I've gotten so many phone calls from parents who are exactly in what you're describing, Gina. And so I refer them to various places, but I've got a document of some helpful resources that might reinforce the fact that no, they're actually the sane ones. They're not going crazy. And here's sort of some good explainers of what's going on. So I'm happy to share that with anyone who would call or contact us.
That's helpful. So how are they going to get a hold of you? I know you're on Facebook, you're on
Yeah.
Twitter. Where?
Well, if you go on Christian Post, and you see reach out to Brandon. If you go to the bottom of my articles, reach out to Brandon, contact Brandon here, or you just email us at the Christian Post, and I'm going to be releasing an ebook later this month, which is going to be aimed at pastors and youth leaders. So that's coming too. A lot on the horizon.
Wonderful. I was going to ask you, when's the book coming out?
Yeah, I do. I do. This is public information already, so I can say this. I co-authored it with Jeff Myers of Summit Ministries.
Okay,
We're going to
good.
be aimed at equipping pastors and lay leaders, doing an event in Dallas in March at a church where we're going to be really equipping people. I mean, I think there's my executive editor likes to say there's no more important question for Christians than what is a human being and what does it mean to be a human being. You know, we're going to ride or die, as I've often said with Genesis 1:27, made in the image of God, male and female. And it's just a scientific fact, too. You should stand for the integrity of science in biology. And so we're going to not compromise on the truth, but people need to be equipped about how to deal with this because there are some complex, complicated, issues that arise when this is affecting a family. And so we want to engage this issue with thoughtfulness, with truthfulness, and with compassion, of course, as well.
Well, thank you so much, Brandon. I am just so amazed at how you've been a light in this dark world, in this dark topic, and I so appreciate you and look forward to your ebook and spreading the word about what you're doing with the work here at Christian Post. So thank you so much.
You bet. Jesus loves the children. We gotta help these families. This is important.
Absolutely, it is. All right, well, take care. We'll be in touch.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.